Shells two ways. The first is going to be a little bit easier, just going with the positive form, and then we'll add some gouache highlights. And the next is still not too hard, but using negative edge technique. Let's get started. So for our first shell, we're just going to do the basic. It's going to be great for beginners. And in the reference photo, I included it so that you could see all the different options that you could use. But for this one, we're gonna use this one particular shell to get started. We want it to be a little damp, so I want to get some of those spread. So I'm gonna spray it with a little bit of water. And the first thing we're gonna do is define the shape of the shell. So we're gonna be concerned with the lines that go horizontally at this point. So I'm just gonna go in and not really worry about the pattern yet, and I'm gonna just go along the edge. And then, like we always do with blending, you go back in with clean water and you just invite that paint to follow along. Whereas these areas here are deeper, so I want them to be a little bit darker. And I'm just gonna go a little bit deeper here on the very edge. Because for this simple version, we just want the attention to be on our subject. We're not worrying about a background at all. We are gonna go for a smaller brush. I'm gonna go to a number 4 round. And that's gonna allow me to have the very tip to do the fine lines. And then if I wanna press down to get a little more contouring, I can use the belly of it. Deepest of the browns. And let's define some of these stripes that go across. And you can see my paper is fairly dry. There's not a lot of spread. And we're just gonna go in and make patterning. And don't worry if it's not super even, because in fact, in nature, the shell would not be even. And just use a very light hand and just follow your sketch. Wet on dry technique. And don't be too fussy. The important thing here is to try to capture the shape of the shell. So as it goes around this curve, so your arm should do the same thing. And now you can use some of your medium brown color and just pick up. Don't worry too much about how many stripes does the reference photo have, how thick or thin they are. Our job really is just to capture the contour of the shell. So just use a very painterly style. And as you're painting, vary the tones of the browns. So all I've done here is added more pigment, less water. And here I just wanted it to be a little looser, so I just introduced a little more water to the edge. And then we get that nice spread. So you control the pattern by the amount of water and pigment you have in your brush. And again, we're just worrying about the shape that go this way. Don't worry about the vertical lines yet. We're going to come back in and do that at another pass. And then with mostly water on your brush and a little bit of your pigment, go ahead and you can start to add some of these next thicker lines. And again, keep following that shape. That's more important than the evenness of the line. And just keep varying those browns that you've chosen. And just compositionally look around and at your piece and say, where do you feel like it needs more of a certain color? And I would look at that more than I would the reference photo. So now let's go ahead and hit some of these lines that go vertically. And I do see a lot of them are white. You could have used masking fluid if you want. We can always go in with a gouache, or in this case, I'm just gonna choose to do them in the lightest of the browns that I had. So I'm just gonna go ahead and draw those positively, even though they appear negatively. And then every now and again, I'm just gonna go in and break it up so that it shows that, again, there's contour to this, and you can go in with a little more pigment. And try to be very light-handed with this. And just get your brush wet and then break it up a little bit. And you can also vary your browns with this as well. So I've just changed to my mid brown, but I'm doing the same technique. And just toggle back and forth between those. And you can go thick on some because there are some space in between. And then using the different browns, just try to pick an area where you've got a horizontal line, and then you kind of echo that, and it'll spread and integrate. You know how I'm always trying to make things connect. And you can see they start to fan out as we move away closer to the edges. So we want to do that same thing. And again, just be very light-handed and painterly. Don't try to get in too tight. The farther you move to the back of your brush, the lighter and looser it'll be, because you lose a little bit of control. Which I always think of watercolor painting as I'm on the brink of chaos. Can you save yourself? It becomes a challenge. And then also vary how close are these lines. Sometimes they're close, and then sometimes they're a little farther apart. Go in with my darkest dark, and I'm just gonna try to capture some little strokes to show that it has texture. And then where you don't have enough depth, you can just catch that at that same time. There's a clear difference between this last stripe and the lightness up here. So that's where I'll just make sure I identify that through these darkest darks. And that should make that pop a little more. Just add a little bit of white gouache just to capture some of those highlights. And then what I can do is I can go back in on top and say, I didn't reserve enough highlight up here, so let's just capture some of that. And then what I'll do is I'll go in next to and I'm not really trying to paint all of these in white. I'm just trying to show that there were some lights and some mediums. But I'm using the same technique where I'm just spreading it after I do the vertical, for example. I just will pull out some of that again to show that form. And here's where I kind of lost my highlight altogether. So just adding a little more water, I can essentially erase some of that. And this is not a necessary step at all. It really doesn't matter. If you like the way yours looked without the gouache, then that's fine. I always say, I'm just trying to be painterly, and then I go in and I get hung up on the reference photo. I think it's just the way our eyes see things. Does it feel resolved, or could it be a little bit better? Which the answer, of course, is always yes, it could be better. And the trick with gouache is you just have to get the right amount of water. You can see sometimes it's too much, or if it gets too dry brushy, it's not enough. And usually, if you take it straight out of the tube, you have better luck. But okay, I can tell I'm getting carried away here. So as far as the lesson goes, you get the idea with the techniques. You can decide how far you want to take it. And the last thing I'll say about the gouache is often you have to go over it a couple times, because it, especially if you've added too much water, it kind of disappears. So you need a few layers of it. We've defined the form. We know the structure of the shell. It has contour, and we can tell there's a pattern on it. So let's move on. I'm not gonna follow the colors that I used on this shell. I'm gonna change them, and they're just gonna be made up. So I'm gonna use blues and purples and things. You can use what you like. You can do the same colors we did here. But instead of going in and putting all of the texture here, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start with the shadowing. So that is gonna define the shape of our shell. So I'm gonna go down here with very wet mixture, and I'm using Moonglow. And I'm just gonna follow the edge of this like we always do with our shadows. We put in the pigment and then we go in and diffuse it until it kind of disappears so that we don't get any of these hard lines. And of course we do want the hard line on the inside because that is going to indicate the edge of the shell. You know, thinking about our light coming in, if it's cast a shadow down here, this is going to be pretty bright. So I don't want to get carried away up there, but and my sketch doesn't indicate, but the picture indicates that the edge does indent because of the ridges. So that's what I'm going to capture in our negative edge painting up here. And again, same technique. I go in and then I'll just, with clean water, invite the paint to blend in. And I have to make sure to capture that on the sides and the top because I don't want to paint all the way around the top. So we're just suggesting the form here. And you can do this with the smaller brush. Mine look a little chunky, but that's okay because this is gonna continue. So just pull a little bit of it in here as you're blending. And then I'm gonna do the same just over here so that we will know that's happening across the top. So I've added water, oops, and dog hair. Added water, so I'm just going in and pulling it out. I'm careful not to do too much toward the inside because we're trying to show the edge. Okay, but that looks good. While it's dry, I'm gonna go ahead and erase the top of this shell, because now my mind's eye can fill in that it's going to be connected and I can leave off a lot of detail. Just repositioning this a little bit. Lavender. And I'm gonna do the same thing we did in the other one, but this time I'm gonna start with my verticals because they're the most prominent, and that's gonna be the best vehicle to define our shapes. And in my sketch, I only gave myself a few marks. So I'm gonna pick those up, and that helps me to know what direction do I need to go. And then of course I can fill in the rest. Again, be very loose. And these were actually painting the grooves, so they are a little bit thicker, and you can blend them out with a little bit of water. Horizontal, it's kind of curved, but I'm gonna just follow that line that I have down, and where I have already painted these, I'm just gonna blend it in a little more. And add as many of these as you want to, again, define the structure. And so now we have to capture a few of these on the edge, but again, I don't want to paint a whole lot of information here. So I'll do the outside one first, and I'm really diluting my paint. And I'm just going to go in and show that there's some bumps here. And in fact, I'm not even going to really connect them because I want this nice little soft blend. So leave a little space here and a little space there, and that'll make it more interesting. Actually, I'm just going to go in and make this a little more defined. So the same thing you did here, just do the ones you want. Here you don't have to do all of them. We just have to show that there's grooves. Okay. So just a few spots to show that there's depth. And you can see I kind of flick my brush, and I change the angle of my arm so that it feels natural. And what we're doing here is adding value, but showing that there's depth to these grooves. And by not connecting the line, that shows that perhaps it's not exactly even, which is great. A little more water, and I'm going to try to do some of these, the ones that go across. So same technique we did here, and just connect and let everything kind of blend as it touches. And there aren't many of these. And again, you don't have to show each one, you can skip. And they don't have to connect in the same place, they just have to follow the form of the shell and blend as you like. And I'm just trying to connect the interior to that shadow just by having that same coloration so that it feels like one continuous piece. And I feel like this just needs a third color, so I'm going to use the Rose of Ultramarine. And I'm just gonna pick a few spots. It's like I blend everything. I put more pigment down, and then I get my brush with just clean water, and I manipulate that pigment and move it around a little. That same color, and I'm just gonna do a few sort of curved shapes up here so that we know that these grooves curve. And then trying to pick a few, again for our structure, pick a few places that help define the shape and go in very dark. And, you know, be mindful of your light. I said our light was coming here. That's why we have lighter areas here and it casts a shadow. So if that's the case, as the shape of the shell is there, this area down here is going to be a little more shaded, as are the areas up here that we said were in shadow. So I don't want to get carried away with this purpley color throughout, because then I kind of lose that nice implication that there's light. But as you can see, I'm always following the shape of the shell. It wouldn't be one of my videos if I didn't talk about contour, so there you go. And now that we've added some detail in here, I feel like our shadow needs to be beefed up a little bit. And I'm just gonna do the same thing I did at the beginning, which is go in. And I don't need to have as much on as much pigment. I just need some to get this edge defined a little better. So it's a bit of a layering, which is fine. And at the deepest deep, you can go in. And say those areas are gonna be the darkest. And then just, you know, be sure to blend out. As you need, just so that you get that nice soft blend. So just to recap, this was our negative edge. Where we painted the shadow and the shadows that snuck in here. And then we went in and just did a light implication of the edge of the form so that we have a mix of the negative edge and the positive, which is really beautiful. And then for our first shell, we did all positive shapes here, and then we went in and added gouache. So this was our easier version. Easier. Positive form, I'll call it. So 2 ways to do shells. And have fun with colors, because that's what watercolor painting is all about. Thanks again for joining me. If you like this video, please be sure to give me a like, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. Have a great day. Until next time, happy painting.